The fall of an empire never begins with an explosion. It begins with a quiet tremor, small enough to ignore, subtle enough to dismiss, but powerful enough to signal that something colossal has already cracked beneath the surface. And today, that tremor is everywhere. It's in the sinking value of money that once felt invincible. It's in the markets that swing with the instability of a dying star. It's in the governments that borrow more in a month than entire nations once produced in a year. But the most terrifying part is this: people don't feel the collapse until they're standing inside it. Every empire throughout history has shared this curse. Rome did not realize it had fallen until the streets were filled with smoke. The British Empire didn't feel the decline until the debts outweighed the dominion. And modern superpowers, armed with central banks, digital currencies, and trillion-dollar budgets, are marching down the same road with a confidence so blind it borders on madness. Because collapse never enters through the front door. It seeps in through the cracks. At first, the signs feel like temporary problems. A deficit here, a banking scare there, inflation that's under control, wars that are contained, and political divides that are just part of democracy. We repeat these reassurances like a prayer, but prayers don't stop cycles. They don't stop mathematics, and they don't stop the weight of history. The truth no government will say aloud is this: we've already crossed the threshold. The numbers don't lie, they simply wait. Debt levels have reached heights no civilization has ever survived. Currencies are losing trust faster than they lose value. Institutions once seen as anchors now drift without direction. It's the kind of moment historians write about centuries later, not realizing that the people living through it were numb, distracted, or misled into believing everything was fine. Empires fall in 4 stages. At first, prosperity creates comfort. Comfort creates debt. Debt creates weakness, and weakness invites collapse. What makes the final stage so destructive is that it unfolds in silence until the silence snaps. And somewhere, right now, something is snapping. You can hear it in the cracks spreading through the financial system as banks quietly restructure their balance sheets. You can hear it in the whispers of policymakers who insist everything is stable while printing money to keep the system breathing. You can hear it in the unease of citizens who feel poorer each month, even if their salaries haven't changed. We are living inside the illusion of stability, the same illusion every empire constructs before the fall. When the Roman denarius was debased, merchants still traded as if nothing had changed. When the French monarchy drowned in debt, the palaces still held their banquets. When the Ottoman economy collapsed, the empire still drew maps of lands it could no longer control. Collapse doesn't wait for the people to notice. It accelerates precisely because they don't. And now, the final stage of the modern cycle is tightening around us. Not as a dramatic explosion, but as a slow suffocation. Trust erodes grain by grain. Savings shrink month by month. Institutions lose credibility headline after headline. By the time the majority realizes something is wrong, the foundations are already ash. The danger of our current moment is not just that the cycle is repeating, it's that it's repeating faster. Information moves at the speed of light. Markets crash in milliseconds. Wars ignite with the push of a button. Debt multiplies in real time. And central banks, once guardians of stability, have become architects of volatility. They print, adjust, intervene, and manipulate, but every action adds another layer to the pressure cooker. And pressure cookers do only one thing when the seal breaks. What we're witnessing is not chaos, it's choreography. The choreography of a dying cycle, following steps so ancient they appear new to us, yet so predictable that historians could recite them from memory. The first tremor has already passed. The second is forming. The third will not ask permission. And when the final stage hits, when the fourth turn of the cycle arrives, people will look back to this moment and realize that the doom was never the collapse itself. It was the blindness before it. History does not repeat, but it does not improvise either. It moves in patterns, in cycles, in rhythms that echo across centuries. Empires may rise under different flags, different gods, different currencies, but the way they collapse is almost always identical. It's as if every civilization is handed the same script, and none of them can resist acting it out. The pattern begins with abundance. Every empire starts with hunger, ambition, and discipline. Its people work harder than their rivals. Its armies fight with purpose. Its currency inspires trust. Prosperity is earned, not invented. But prosperity carries a hidden poison: comfort. Comfort weakens discipline. Comfort sedates caution. Comfort convinces leaders that the rules no longer apply to them. And somewhere between glory and arrogance, the first shift begins. This is stage 1, the rise. The empire expands, wealth flows inward, and the people believe they are living at the center of history. Productivity is high, innovation flourishes, the future seems limitless. But limitless futures demand limitless spending. Stage 2 emerges quietly, the overreach. Armies require funding, infrastructure needs maintenance, social programs expand, political promises multiply. The empire borrows, first modestly, then recklessly. Debt becomes the invisible scaffolding holding up the illusion of strength, and the citizens adapt to the illusion just as easily as their rulers do. They become accustomed to government generosity, to the feeling that abundance is permanent. But abundance paid with borrowed time is not abundance at all. It is the first crack in the cycle. Stage 3 arrives like a change in weather, the decay. This is where the empire begins to hollow from within. Productivity stagnates, innovation slows, corruption spreads like mold in a forgotten room. The elites, the same elites who once built the empire, now extract more than they create. They tighten their grip, convinced they can manage the decline quietly. And to hide the shrinking real wealth, the empire turns to its oldest trick: currency manipulation. Rome diluted its silver, France printed assignats. The Qing dynasty devalued copper coins. The British Empire inflated its way through the end of dominance. Every empire, without exception, tries to cheat the mathematics of decline. Every empire loses that battle. Stage 4 is the one no civilization escapes: the collapse. Collapse does not mean immediate ruin. It means the unraveling of trust. Trust in the currency, trust in the government, trust in the future. Once trust dissolves, institutions follow. Markets break. Social order fractures. External enemies advance. Internal enemies rise. The empire becomes vulnerable, not because its enemies are strong, but because its foundations are exhausted. But while the names change, Rome, Ming, Ottoman, British, the pattern remains the same. Prosperity, debt, decay, collapse. The four-stage cycle, the ancient metronome of power. Historians spend centuries documenting these cycles, but the people who lived through them often didn't see the pattern until it was too late. The Roman citizen believed Rome was eternal. The Chinese scholar believed the dynasty was divinely chosen. The British financier believed sterling would rule forever. Every empire at its peak believes it is the exception. Every empire at its end discovers it was just another chapter. What makes this cycle so terrifying is not its inevitability, it is its invisibility. Inside an empire, people see only their moment, never the pattern. They feel the prosperity, but not the debt beneath it. They sense the decay, but explain it away. They hear the warnings, but dismiss them as pessimism. And then, suddenly, the pattern can no longer be denied. Historians often point to a single event: the sack of a city, the collapse of a currency, the assassination of a leader. But the truth is simpler. Empires do not die overnight. They die long before the world realizes it. The fall is merely the final symptom. And now, as we look at our own time, the same cycle rises again with chilling precision. The stages that destroyed past empires have resurfaced, louder, faster, and more global than ever before. The question is no longer whether the pattern exists. The question is whether we can recognize it before it consumes us. If the four-stage cycle were only a relic of ancient history, we could admire it from a safe distance. But the most disturbing truth of our age is that every warning sign that once toppled empires has returned, and this time, they are appearing all at once. It begins with debt, because debt is the silent pulse of decline. Past empires borrowed to extend their dominance. Modern empires borrow to maintain the illusion of one. Today's global debt has grown so colossal that no historian, economist, or algorithm can even map its real boundaries. Nations have crossed thresholds that once marked the point of no return, yet they continue borrowing as if mathematics will someday show mercy. Rome debased its silver to pay its armies. We debase our currency to pay for everything. The Ottoman treasury collapsed when expenditures outpaced revenue for too long. Today, governments run deficits that dwarf their own GDPs and call it policy. The Qing dynasty watched its currency lose credibility until peasants refused it. Now modern citizens flee to assets outside the system, gold, crypto, land, because they no longer trust the printed promises of their rulers. The parallels are not subtle, they are identical. Then comes polarization, the social fracture that always announces the third stage of the cycle. Every empire in decline begins to divide against itself. The people stop seeing each other as citizens and start seeing each other as enemies. Political tribes replace national identity. Fury replaces dialogue. Each side believes the other is the true threat. History is merciless here. Rome tore itself apart with civil wars long before the barbarians arrived. The late French monarchy drowned in internal hatred before the revolution struck. The British Empire decayed at home before it shrank abroad. And today, our societies follow the same script: left versus right, rich versus poor, center versus edge, citizen versus state. The fracture widens, fueled by algorithms, amplified by media, weaponized by those who benefit from chaos. Every empire collapses from within before it collapses from without. The economic fractures intensify, the social fractures deepen. And then comes the most dangerous parallel of all: military overreach. A declining empire always tries to project strength long after it has lost the capacity to sustain it. Rome kept expanding its borders even as its treasury emptied. The Ottomans launched campaigns they couldn't finance. The British stretched their military across continents they could no longer control. Today's superpowers engage in the same dangerous choreography: global commitments, endless conflicts, proxy wars, defense budgets expanding like black holes consuming light. It's not strength, it's inertia. It's not confidence, it's desperation. The cycle is repeating with terrifying fidelity. Central banks, the modern emperors of money, attempt to halt the decline with measures that look sophisticated, but mirror the same panic-driven actions of every dying regime. Lower rates, print money, inflate the bubble, call it recovery. Repeat. These interventions do not fix the system, they accelerate its decay. They mask rot with fresh paint. They treat systemic cancer with cosmetic surgery. And the public, just like citizens of fallen empires, tries to believe everything is fine. They cling to normalcy, not because they trust the system, but because the alternative feels unthinkable. Yet the unthinkable is exactly what history teaches us to expect. The parallels are no longer coincidences. They form a mirror so sharp, so exact, it cuts through denial. Debt at record extremes, currency depreciation, political division, social unrest, military overextension, central bank intervention, declining trust in institutions. This is not a random collection of crises. It is the architecture of collapse. Every empire that followed this path reached the same destination. But modern civilization faces an even more dangerous variant of the cycle. It's global, synchronized, and accelerated by technology. We are not watching one empire decline. We are watching the entire world system enter the final turn. The past is not haunting us. It is warning us. The signs that once toppled empires are here, repeating with mathematical precision. and those who study history can feel it in their bones. The fourth stage is no longer approaching, it is arriving. Every collapse has fingerprints, and when you follow those fingerprints far enough, past the noise, past the headlines, past the distractions, you always find the same thing waiting at the end of the trail. Someone benefits. Empires don't fall by accident. They fall because a small group learns how to profit from the implosion. The masses lose everything: savings, stability, certainty. But the architects of the system walk away untouched, often richer than before. This is the revelation hidden beneath every financial crisis, every debt spiral, every historical breakdown. The greatest lie ever told is that collapse is chaotic. The truth is far darker. Collapse is engineered. For centuries, a pattern appears just before the end. The ruling class, who once built the empire, quietly shifts into extraction mode. They stop investing in the future and start harvesting the present. They drain the system from the inside, knowing they won't be around when the crash arrives. Rome's senators hoarded land and gold while the legions starved. French elites gambled with royal debt until the revolution made the country ungovernable. British financiers exported wealth offshore as the empire shrank. And in the modern world, the mechanism is even cleaner, sharper, and more invisible. The financial elite control the collapse by controlling the currency. They sit inside central banks, think tanks, supranational institutions, and private boardrooms where no cameras are allowed. They shape policy not to preserve stability, but to preserve power. They know the cycle is ending, long before the public does, and instead of sounding the alarm, they tighten their grip. Every time the system stresses, they present the same solution: print more, borrow more, inflate more. These aren't rescue operations, they're extraction events. Inflation quietly transfers wealth upward from the public to those who own assets. Debt allows governments to funnel money into corporate giants. Crises become profit machines. Nothing about this is accidental. When currencies wobble, bankers celebrate. They buy distressed assets for pennies. When markets fall, insiders feast. They already moved their money before the crash. When nations drown in debt, global institutions step in, not to save them, but to control them. This is the silent coup that repeats across history. The empire weakens, the elite strengthens. And the most revealing sign is what they do with their own wealth. They don't hold the currency they tell the public to trust. They don't save in the system they insist is stable. They quietly convert their fortunes into gold, land, hard assets, private networks. The same things elites have used for thousands of years to survive imperial collapse. They speak the language of optimism while building lifeboats behind closed doors. But their most powerful weapon is narrative. Empires fall when the public stops believing in the story, so the story must be controlled. We need temporary inflation. The debt is manageable. The crisis is contained. The system is resilient. Every sentence crafted, every speech calibrated, every reassurance rehearsed. Because panic is dangerous for them. Panic means the public wakes up, and the greatest fear of the modern elite is not a financial crash. It is a loss of control. This is why the fourth stage of the cycle is always wrapped in deception. Not because the truth is complex, but because the truth is simple. They knew. They always knew. They watched the debt explode. They saw the currency weaken. They tracked the capital flight. They studied the historical cycles. And still, they pushed forward, knowing the burden would fall on the ordinary citizen, not on them. What we call collapse is merely the final act of a long, calculated extraction. When the system breaks, they blame external enemies, political rivals, or global uncertainty, but never the real culprit. A small circle of beneficiaries who profit from every stage of decline. They did not cause the cycle, but they accelerated it. They did not invent the collapse, but they weaponized it. They did not break the empire, but they decided how to feast on its remains. This is the revelation the public is never meant to see. Collapse is not the end of their power. Collapse is the consolidation of it. And as the fourth turn of the cycle tightens around us, The question is no longer whether the elite understand what comes next. The question is whether we do. The final stage of every empire feels like a trap closing in slow motion. People sense the tension tightening around their lives, rising prices, shrinking opportunities, leaders who speak confidently while their eyes betray fear. But what history reveals, again and again, is that collapse is never the end of the story. It is the clearing of the stage before something new can be born. The fourth stage of the cycle destroys, but the fifth, unwritten, unspoken, belongs to those who understand what is coming. Because even when an empire falls, life continues. Markets reorganize, power rebalances, a new system emerges from the old. The tragedy is that most citizens enter the final stage blind. The opportunity is that a few enter it prepared. The inevitability of the cycle does not mean we are powerless. It means we must choose whether to ride the collapse or be crushed by it. Throughout history, those who survived the fall were never the strongest or the wealthiest. They were the ones who understood the transformation before it arrived. They recognized that when institutions break, the individual must become the institution. When currencies fail, value must become tangible. When trust collapses, self-reliance becomes non-negotiable. Rome's citizens who held land and metals survived generations after the empire fractured. Europeans who diversified outside collapsing currencies protected their families for decades. Those who saw the British decline coming moved capital before the pound evaporated. The cycle rewards foresight more than force. And today, we stand at the same threshold. But unlike past civilizations, the next phase won't be isolated to one empire. It will reshape the entire global system. A world built on debt, artificial stability, and centralized control cannot unwind gently. When the pillars crack, the tremor will spread everywhere. That is the inevitability. But inevitability is not destiny. Because collapse also creates openings, windows of clarity that only appear when the old structure is burning down. In this stage, financial illusions die, political deceptions fade, and the truth becomes painfully visible. What survives the end of an empire is what has always survived: real value, real autonomy, real resilience. Gold does not obey governments. Decentralized technologies do not bow to central banks. Skills cannot be devalued. Self-sufficiency cannot be inflated away. These are the pillars individuals have used for millennia to outlive systems much larger and more powerful than themselves. We do not choose the cycle we are born into, but we choose how we stand inside it. And the most important decision of this era is simple. Do we cling to the collapsing structure, or do we build beyond it? The government will not save us. They cannot even save themselves. The institutions will not protect us. They are struggling to protect their own existence. The elites will not warn us. They have already built their exit routes. That leaves only one group with the power to act: ordinary people who refuse to go blind into the final stage. Because the truth is haunting but liberating. Empires collapse, but people endure. Currencies die, but value endures. Governments fall, but communities endure. Every cycle ends the same way, with destruction. But what rises after the destruction is always shaped by those who prepared while everyone else slept. And now, as the world edges toward the end of another empire, maybe the largest one ever, we face a moment that will be recorded in the histories of the future. A civilization collapsing, and individuals awakening. The cycle cannot be stopped, but it can be broken. Not by empires, but by those who refuse to be buried with them. And